This is Ed Rep Radio, presented by Eastman Music Company. This is Ed Rep Radio, a podcast to bring you ideas and information from industry experts you can use on the road every day. Presented by Eastman Music Company, and I'm your host, Shane Duell. We've heard from a few of our guests here on Ed Rep Radio that private teachers have a significant influence on their students when it comes to the instruments they rent or purchase and from which store. We're going to hear from the perspective of a private violin teacher today, Rachelle Puccini. Ms. Puccini is an active violin soloist, teacher, and clinician. She is also a clinician for Eastman Strings, and I've had the pleasure of working with her out in the schools. She does an amazing job. Ms. Puccini will share her thoughts on being a private teacher, the role music stores play in her life, how she helps students select instruments, and she shares some candid advice on how stores can best service private teachers like herself and her students. To learn more about Rachelle Puccini, you can visit her website at rachellepuccini.com. That's RACHELLEPUCCINI.com. Rachelle, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. This is exciting.
I'm really looking forward to hearing your perspective on being a string player, being a string teacher, how you work with your students, and really most importantly, how music stores can provide the best service to you. And I think to learn about what's important to you is going to be the most valuable thing for the ed reps out there who are out there servicing orchestra programs, working with parents and teachers, private teachers like yourself, and students, getting them into a better instrument. So I'd like to first launch into you and your background and how long you've been playing and how long you've been teaching.
Well, I'll try to be as helpful as possible with all of that that you mentioned. But I got my start actually on piano when I was 5. And I didn't really want to play piano. I really wanted to play violin. And I begged my parents, and I was finally allowed to start playing the violin. Too late, in my opinion, but I finally got the violin in my hands when I was about 9 years old. And then the rest is history. You know, I went to Grand Valley State University, got my bachelor's, then Northwestern, got my master's. And from then on, it's just been doing my projects and playing a ton all over the world. And then recently, I would say in about the last 5 years, I've gotten into doing a lot of educational things. I've always taught privately and in institutes and organizations. And I would say by now, goodness, how old am I now? I would say I have about a good 20 years plus of teaching experience in a variety of settings and with a variety of different students. And so I decided to develop these clinics based on topics that I saw reoccurring in my studios, in the classrooms that I would visit, and what projects were the most important, what pedagogical topics were the most important for me to kind of say, hey, you know, I have an opinion on this and perhaps it could help you. And I put together these clinics, and I've been going all over the conference circuit, I should say. And that's continued into COVID times, doing it virtually. And that's been really fulfilling. So in addition to playing in orchestras, solo recitals, I have a lot of recital projects that I'm currently working on. I just released a video last summer. That was exciting. These conferences have really kind of filled the cup up. And I feel very privileged to be able to reach out to string players in this way. So that's been a fun way to use all of my years of teaching experience.
Thank you. Something you said really caught me, that you started at the age of 9 and you thought that was too late.
I know. Yeah, I know that a lot of people start in middle school, and I guess that's kind of where I started too. And that's considered normal for our country. But to be like a violinist, to be an actual, soloist or orchestral player, it takes so many years of training and training in the right way. And many of those players started at the age of 4, 5, 3, 2, sometimes even. And that's considered,
Amazing.
yeah, I know. And that's considered normal in our field, in the professional world, I would say. And definitely in other parts of the world are much more used to this tradition than we are
Hmm.
here in the United States. Once the Suzuki method kind of hit our shores, then we got the memo. Oh, okay, we can start very young children, and this is how we do it. Even though strong traditions of string playing had already been established in, Europe and parts of Asia, um, we didn't quite think that was that
Hmm.
was for us. And then Suzuki came along, and I know that there were strong. I'm not saying there weren't any of this tradition in America, so there certainly were, but I think it's much more mainstream now to say, well, I have a 4-year-old who wants to play the violin. What do I do with her?
Hmm.
Well, you put her in a Suzuki school, and off she goes. Kindergarten is actually ideal, I think,
Hmm.
just across the board. If you start younger than that, it's kind of on a per child basis. You obviously have to be a calm enough child to not drop the thing, because they're careful instruments, it
Hmm.
can break. Kindergarten is wonderful because most kids have that kind of sense of duty, I guess, with school, and they like, okay, I go to school and I brush my teeth and
Mm-hmm.
I can put my clothes on and this kind of thing. So it across the board, it's usually a wonderful place to start because the child is just ready for something like that. And they can be taught to be careful, and they can be taught to practice and all of the wonderful things that come with learning a string instrument or any instrument. Yeah.
Start them young. Right. So in your studio, Rachelle, what ages do you teach?
I teach all ages, actually. I've taken as young as 2 and all the way to college. I've finally been in the same place long enough to actually take my 2-year-olds that I had, I forget how many years ago, all the way to college and beyond. And that's been really exciting because I've never been in the same place to see, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, the fruits of my labor. Like,
Hmm.
oh, this is my method, this is my ideas. And I'm working with this student over the years, and I've basically given them most everything, on the instrument, with the exception of other influences that come into their life, of course. But the technique is mine, and to watch what that looks like at the end of the road is super fulfilling. It's very exciting.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I'm curious, as a private violin teacher, what do you find particularly challenging with being a private teacher? Is it finding students? Is it dealing with instruments with students? What would you consider is maybe 1 or 2 challenges you have to face as a private teacher?
I would say if you are a private teacher on your own, recruiting can be tough because usually these teachers are in the nooks and crannies of the music world,
Hmm.
and you have to know about them in order to study with them, and it would be fairly word of mouth. I have been privileged enough to work at an institute, so a lot of that's done for me. But I remember a long time ago when I taught only privately, and how I would be going into the schools and recruiting that way, but only in the orchestra classrooms as an option for kids who were more interested, who wanted to study privately. And then, of course, the orchestra teacher is pushing it because she wants a better program, and it's great. It's a wonderful relationship with the teachers. So that was working very well. But when I talk about, taking a child from 2, 3, 4, this kinds of age all the way, because it does take that long. Right now my kids are playing Sibelius, Mendelssohn, Dvorak, Paganini, Bach sonatas parties. Like, it's so fulfilling now as a music teacher, but there's not really time to get to that level before college. If if they don't start at a certain age, or really, really, really work hard to make up for it. So there was no way for me to really tap into or at least where I was. This was back in Michigan. There was really no way for me to tap into the kindergarten market because there was no music class for them that I could pop into and do a little petting zoo.
Right.
Or perhaps if I had been older and more clever, I would have found a way. Now, knowing what I know, I'm sure I could gather a studio of students. But I would say that's the trickiest part. And I think it's the trickiest, right. I think it's the trickiest part also for music stores to find these private teachers, because there's no list for them. There's no database. Like finding them takes a little bit of sleuthing.
For the music store to find teachers.
For the music store, right. To reach out, to these people and find out how they can serve them, because there's a lot of business there.
How would it change that challenge of yours, recruiting, if music stores in your area would start feeding students to you at a regular pace?
It's very good. Actually, I have a store locally that I'm on a list there. And over the years, I've gotten a few students there. So it's tremendously helpful. I think that when you live in a country like us, which I've discussed has this history of kind of being new to the game, and I mean new like within the last 70 years or so, that's fairly new, because I feel like other parts of the world have been doing this for hundreds of years now, of this tradition.
Sure.
So in a country that's relatively new to what it means when your 4-year-old daughter says, I want to play the violin, and then knowing where to take them and everything like that. When you get a child that says, I want to play something, and then the parents like, well, I don't know, like, where'd the local teacher, how do you do this? Well, they walk into the music store, because that's what they know. And that's a hub. That's a physical representation of what we're doing here. And so I think if the music stores were equipped and set up to have a list of private teachers, that would really, really serve the private teacher market.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you think that would help build a relationship with you between the store and you, the teacher?
Of course. Yes, absolutely.
There's a good tip right there for music stores. If you don't already have a list of private teachers, get to know the teachers in your area. Make that list and get it out to anybody asking about teachers, and you'll probably gain a lot of friends in the music teacher world, which goes a long ways. So Rachelle, I'd like to dig into your thoughts on instruments, and we'll start with your students. Let's start with the young ones, the beginners. What do you look for in a beginning instrument? What do you consider a good one?
Well, with the little ones, it's really about, honestly, durability. And I know that violates almost everything that us professional string players look for in an instrument. But these things will be dropped. I mean, you're lying to yourself if you're not thinking that this instrument is going to be dropped. It will be. We try to avoid it, but it happens all the time. And the ones I see hit the floor that come out all right, that's always a winner for me. And they're so tiny that at this point, there's like a lot of physical ratios that are going on in creating these instruments that have been developed, 350 years ago, that are really the ideals of why a violin sounds the way it does and why it sounds perfect at this particular ratios and blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's classes devoted to this kind of thing, so I'm not going to go into it too much. So when we start getting into fractional instruments, we are violating these ideals. And
right.
So there's compromises that luthiers and violin makers, teeny tiny violin makers, make when trying to adapt these ratios to tiny hands. I'm not of the school of thought that thinks that a child should just play on a larger violin as fast as possible. That's not in keeping with my line of teaching. We can go into why, but that's a different podcast maybe. So I do like my students on instruments that will most likely mimic the size that they will be on, like proportionally the size that they will be as an adult. It's impossible to guess, but kind of looking at the parents and seeing if they're tall for their age or whatnot, you can kind of come close. So even though it might be teeny tiny, the violin needs to speak. It needs to try not to sound as much like a rubber band as possible, because those things, when they get so small, the poor little G string barely, barely works. So anything that's able to produce as beautiful of tone as it can, all while being dropped, is is really, really the standard there. To be honest, I'm not picky at that range. I do need the instrument to stay in tune. That's a big deal. These children are not seeing their teachers every day. They usually are seeing a teacher once or twice a week, and that's when they're getting their instruments tuned. And while we do try to educate the parent on how to tune the instruments, again, these things are being dropped. They're not being cared for well, because it's a new parent as well trying to care for this thing, and the instruments come with their own set of rules. So intonation is a huge thing. We want the thing to stay in tune, which means that it has to be crafted well enough for those pegs down to the tailpiece, the string tension with the bridge, to all be aligned well and in good working order. Nothing's going to pop off, so that tension doesn't keep pulling the instrument out of tune, in addition to environmental hazards that happen. So it's got to be a tank.
So it has to be durable.
Yeah.
But it also has to play decently.
Yes, decently. It's good if we can get a ringing tone out of it. That's like, wow, great. We've hit the jackpot. But I think as a violinist and as a violin teacher, I'm just so used to making sound compromises in the fractional violin zone that I just say, just deal with it. Child, like the student, you're just going to have to deal with it until you can, until you grow and you get something bigger, and it's going to get better and better as you go.
Yeah. What if you have an older student, say your average fifth grader who started in school orchestra, and let's say they're on a full-size instrument?
Okay.
Does it change at all? Is it what you look for in that full size?
Completely.
For that, even for a beginner?
Absolutely. Because it doesn't matter if it's a beginner or not. Once we're into full-size land, now we're dealing with the ideal proportions that the instrument is supposed to be made in. So everything should work in the optimal way. So yes, completely changes. Now I'm not looking for such a tank. A heavier violin is a violin that's trapping a lot of vibrations, and that makes us sound worse. So we don't want that. We don't want a heavy violin. I do need the violin to be crafted well. Okay, so don't misunderstand me. Everything does need to be in good working order and handcrafted super well. We don't want machine-made instruments at all. This is a big deal, because the violin is too subtle to be stamped out. And I think when they stamp these top and bottom plates, instead of carve them, then the wood is just spending its entire life as a violin resisting this stamp, or however they do it. And I don't know. But the top plates come off, and it violates the curves that have been put in, and they don't resonate at all. They're just,
we call that a pressed top.
Yeah.
It's done under pressure of a press.
Yeah. And we remember that these instruments, whether pressed tops or hand carved, were trees at one point. And if you don't make a stringed instrument with the acknowledgement that this was a tree, and you rush that process, and I'm no luthier by any means, but this has just been what's explained to me by some of the world's best violin makers, that if you violate that process, a couple examples: you don't let the wood age enough, you don't let the violin sit, in its state before setting it up long enough. I don't really know all the processes, but it takes time, and And if you don't acknowledge that this was a tree and that you're putting it into a new form and that for a while it's going to fight that form, you're just building a violin way too soon that's going to come undone and not line up. And, you know, there's a lot. These people go to school for years and years, and then they apprentice for years and years. And then they spend the first half of their career experimenting. And my goodness, I think it's a good 40 years in before you're like, yeah. Huh. I don't know. I'm just guessing. But it's such a time-honored craft that everything has to work so well, even to get these things to sound well enough and to hold up for as long as they need to. So that craftsmanship is really important. But we're not looking for anything heavy anymore. We're looking for lighter. Lighter means that there's less wood left on the instrument, which means it's been carved correctly and put together correctly, and it's going to vibrate. That's our sound is going to come out. It has to be a clean, honest instrument. That is the number one thing that I recommend to all beginners and all of my students. Now, if they grow up and they grow out of my studio and they're adults and they're going to buy their new violin and they want something warmer or with a different personality, okay, that's fine. You know, there's beautiful sounding instruments out there, but I believe while you're a student, especially, that you need something that is going to be super honest, because there are violins out there that will disguise your intonation problems, your vibrato, your sound, your technique. They are fuzzy and warm, and they might make you feel good at the time, but they are disasters for a student because they don't ever really develop a good, strong look in the mirror. And that's really what we want from an instrument during the beginning to, you know, I don't know, confident player.
Yeah.
Because we want to grow.
That's interesting.
Yeah, we want to grow an intonation really, really, really well. And all of our
how can you tell? How can you tell as a player which one is this type of violin that's disguising these things that you're talking about, and one that's honest? Yeah. What do you feel? What do you hear?
Well, for me, it comes out the most in the vibrato. And I know that a lot of times this is not some technique that a beginner might have in order to be able to. So that's where the shop can really help, and having string playing people on your staff can really help so that they can play these instruments for the people who are coming in shopping and who need to be able to tell a difference between, okay, this is a warmer violin, this is a brighter violin, this is a more direct violin, this is focused, this is lying to you, this isn't. And then just let the customer make the decision, because of course that's who's going to make the decision in the long run. But I always found it to be my vibrato. So if you vibrate a note on a violin, you should be able to hear the oscillations back and forth, and even at any intensity. So if you're really intensely vibrating, and that means, the finger is rocking back and forth on a certain pitch, and you can speed that up or you can slow that down. And the violin should be able to reflect what you are doing on it. And if you don't hear that, if you just hear kind of like a blanketed idea or an impression of vibrato, that's muddy, and that's not gonna be really honest with you. And when that starts to happen, it's possible for the instrument to cover up that intonation, which sometimes people want, but I say not when you're a student. Absolutely not. You will never develop a full sense of pitch. And I mean, if we can't be in tune, we don't have much, because that's one of the biggest challenges for string players, is to be in tune, or as in tune as we can be, right? Because intonation is always changing. But yeah.
So I'm curious, do you find the clarity, the honesty that you're talking about, do you find that it's more prevalent in, I guess, higher quality and therefore higher priced instruments? Or are there student instruments, do you feel, that do this well?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I have seen this quality in every price point. So if you're in a step-up price point, for instance, then yeah, it's possible for you to audition several violins, even of the same model or of the same maker, and kind of pit them against each other and find the clearest one.
Hmm.
And then if you're in like a rental market, I've taken several violins. My student needs a bigger size, so the shop sends over like 4 or 5, and they're like, okay, pick one. And I do, and I pick the one that is the clearest of that one within what the student is needing to get at the time. I would not say that higher price equals more clarity, because clarity is based on so many other things. It's based on what violin was what model was the violin modeled after. So in this, I mean, like, is it modeled after Stradivari copy, because Stradivari lived hundreds of years ago, and if you don't know, was basically the founder of the most copied violin in the world now, and he developed this technology of approximately 350 years ago, and his violins have lived on to this day and are the most valued and most expensive instruments that we have. That and Guarneri was another guy who was doing the same thing, slightly different time, but their instruments have really become these ideals in proportion, in sound, in wood they used. We still don't even know all of the mysteries that make a Stradivarius as amazing as it is, because these instruments are still being played in concert halls today, and they're so exquisite. I think now some modern instruments are coming close to and even surpassing, if I might say, because I have one of these modern instruments, and they figured it out. They're figuring out these tricks, but always honoring the past, what came before. So a lot of times companies like Eastman or like other violin makers around town, they will take one of these famous violin makers from the past, and they will copy certain instruments that they like, that have either become famous or that the maker just has an affinity for. And that can make a huge deal on how projecting the instrument is, how brilliant, how dull, how sweet, or honest, focused, all those little adjectives that you can find. That's usually based on the model. And in this kind of price point that I think we're talking about, it has to do with whether it's been crafted correctly. You can have a violin that's been modeled on a Stradivari copy, but it's been made poorly. It's not going to sound anything like that.
So it goes back to that craftsmanship, doesn't it?
Right. It really does. So to kind of get to your question, even though I'm going around and around, usually violins at the higher price point will have this kind of care in them, this kind of time, craftsmanship, again, quality of materials. It's all in there. So they are going to have much higher likelihood of sounding like the models they are copying than something in the lower price point, where, because they are lower priced, some things have been cut from the to-do list. It's natural. I don't expect the tank of a violin that I recommend to my 4-year-old students to have the same time and sound quality and everything put into them. Even if it did happen, the likelihood of that paying off is just slim to none. Because how many 4-year-olds are playing Paganini? I mean, I know they're out there, but but it's just really, that's not what we're using these things for. So once we're into the full size, it's really about finding your price range as a student, and then looking for the qualities you want, and then auditioning many, many violins within that price point.
Okay. Is that how string players tend to shop? By price point, they think of the range of a price that they want to spend, and they go try a bunch?
Yeah, it is, because mostly, we have this tradition that I've been talking about, the Stradivarius, Guarneri, Amati, Guadagnini, Guillaume, like this long tradition of violin making. And these instruments that I just rattled off, they are worth millions of dollars. So we think in our head, okay, spend more money, get closer to that, that Stradivarius. But so usually a higher budget yields better instruments. However, it's not always true. And you can find really great, especially if they're done by modern makers, like makers that are alive, living right now with the technology we have, putting out instruments that have been well crafted. You can find tremendous finds for any price point. But it's best, that is how we shop. So if you say, like, well, I've got XYZ amount of money, then a violin shop will take all of the instruments up to that and show you. And it's a very evil trick to show a customer something that's outside of that price range without their permission, because they're always going to love it.
Right.
Yeah, so it's good to honor what they've said. But just because somebody has said that they can spend XYZ, it doesn't mean that their ideal violin isn't, well below that. So it's important to show everything,
So coming from a band player perspective, a lot of band people have very specific models from very specific makers. It has to have a very specific bore size and its certain mouthpiece, and every one of these has a model number. Do string players think that way?
We don't really even know. Like, if you're buying an instrument with a model number, like Eastman has, numbers and names for their violins, I know, and I would assume it crosses all of the string instruments. As a violinist, we don't really know. It's not like, oh, my teacher has a 928, so therefore I'm going to go get a 928. We don't know that, and that's again because of this tradition that our violins have names in them. Our violins have makers behind them. We don't have model numbers, serial numbers, bore size. Like a maker could have made several different models over their entire career, and they could have varied in size. So speaking of Stradivarius, if you get like a golden period Stradivari, they are, of a certain size. If you go later, then they're a little larger. If you, I'm not repeating history verbatim, but is it something like that, that different violins from different time periods of a maker's life are going to do different things. And that's because they're experimenting. They're trying new things. They're always trying to be better. And, different varnishes, it's just the sky's the limit.
So they're not making the same violin exactly the same way every single time.
I think it's impossible. I think that they have a form that they follow. And again, I'm not a violin maker. So I'm just speaking from what I've seen and what's been told to me and what I've kind of gleaned off my experiences with luthiers, but I'm not one. So I'm sure that there's a lot of details that I'm just not equipped to answer. But they have models that they follow and molds like that they make their violins with, but no two are going to come out exactly the same. I have a friend of mine is the father of one of my students, and he makes cellos. Actually, he's a really great cello maker, and he's gotten into making violins. I mean, I suppose he always could make violins. It's just recently he's been making violins. I don't want to speculate, but maybe it's because his daughter has gotten to full size, so he's made her newest violin, and then he's making a couple. I haven't seen him in over a year because of COVID. I've only seen the daughter virtually, but so I don't know where he's at with that. But the last time he made some violins, he made a pair of twins. So that means simultaneously he was working on these instruments. One might be slightly ahead of the other, but basically they're being born at the same time.
Okay.
And they were modeled on the same pattern and done in the same way, and he was doing it at the same time, so we can rule out outside conditions, or emotional state, because they were being done at the same time, and they sound different. So, and that's just the way it is. That's the way it goes. And
you're okay with that?
Oh, it has to be. That's the way it is. There's no way that even a mass-produced violin is going to come out the same sound. Even trumpets don't. You think they do because they've got the same serial number and bore size and blah, 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 but they don't. I have shopped with my husband countless times where we have taken the same model number and trumpets born at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
and everything, and they sound different too.
Hmm.
It's metal, and there's a lot of more molds, and you know, violins are not done like that because they're carved. So they are different, and wood is different. Oh my goodness, how are you going to get the same slab of wood from the same part of the tree? No, there's only one in the whole
Mm-hmm.
world.
Right.
And that is why your violin sounds the way it is. There's no two people alike. There's no same tree that was grown. There's no identical, that's so cool, I think.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that. Sometimes in the band world, if instruments of the same model, like you say, play differently, some people will say, "Oh, well, those are inconsistent." But it sounds like in the string world, that's not just okay, but it's kind of cool.
Well, yeah, I just think we've never known anywhere else, and even the player playing it, like if they pick up the same instrument, like the same actual instrument, one player plays it and then another player tries it, they will sound completely different.
So it sounds like if it has a model number,
Yeah.
it's just a inconsequential piece of data.
No,
It doesn't really matter.
not really.
What really matters is the price range and how you like it, right?
Oh,
Is that what I'm gathering?
Yes, and you mean from like how we think, how us violinists think.
Yeah, when you're selecting an instrument.
Right. And yeah, we don't care. We don't care what the model number is. We care if we can afford it, and we care if it sounds like how we want to sound. And that sound can happen in any price range. And it's good to try them all. Usually you're going to get closer to the ideals you want if you have a certain price range. But I must say, I mean, I don't think anyone listening is dealing in the, antique fine Italian instruments. But I'll preface to say that it does get to a limit where the more money you throw at it doesn't necessarily yield a better instrument until you get to the $1 million, which I don't know who's shopping there right now.
It sounds like the law of diminishing returns.
Yeah,
after a certain point.
After a certain point, right? Exactly. Isn't that if you're under a certain price range, you should just really try everything, because you could be surprised, and it's exhausting. So it's kind of important to know what you're looking for, like whether you want a modern instrument or whether you want something that's older. And then older only gets you so far, because those older ones are really, really expensive, because now you're dealing with antique, like artistic value.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you're working with a student of yours and it's time for them to get a better instrument, first of all, what is a signal to you as a teacher that they need to get a better instrument from what they're playing on now?
Yeah. If the instrument is not able to give back what they're giving in. So for the easiest way to give an example of this is the bow, because the bow is usually well behind the violin, and has always been an issue for my studio, in that once we start doing off the string bow strokes, so things like spiccato, sautille, ricochet, these types of bow strokes really require a bow that is designed extremely well, with all the correct proportions and weight and balance. Otherwise, these bow strokes really don't work. And in order to get them to work, the student has to violate the physics of how we would normally get these bow strokes to happen, this technique to happen. So they kind of have to make adaptations. And those adaptations are not good for us. They're not healthy. When you're growing a student and growing a certain technique, they need something that works. They need something that's smarter than them. And I always tell my students that their bow is smarter than them, and that they just need to get out of its way. Yeah, I don't want to get into so much pedagogy here, but it's really an important lesson that every violinist kind of comes to, because sometimes we think that we are responsible to make a certain bow stroke happen. And we forget that no, the bow is designed to make those bow strokes happen. And we just need to learn the correct physics of how it happens, and then provide that environment for it, and then get it out of its way, because it will happen. It will. I'm not saying you don't have to do anything. You do. You need to know where to put the bow, how much pressure, how much bow at how much speed. You've got to learn that. But then after that, you don't make the off the string happen. It doesn't work like that. So with a bad bow, my students are having to adapt in the wrong way. And I know, okay, that's not going to be good for us. It's not good for our sound. It's trapping the vibrations. It's going to lead to like tension related issues. It's just a downward slope. So that's usually the first time where I go, okay, we need to get a better bow. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to perform these bow strokes. And then with violins, it's like, okay, your sound is really, really dull. It's not coming out. We're starting to do faster work. We're starting to do a lot of vibrato. We're starting to do a lot of shifting. And I simply cannot hear, this fast passage. It sounds muddy or just dull. And that's again, where we were talking about earlier in the conversation, that's not really where I want my students to be, because that's not an honest violin, and that's not going to create an honest violinist who knows where their F sharp is. And, that's what we want. So those are two of the clues that tell me, okay, other than size. But honestly, I've prefaced this kind of purchase, this step up full-size purchase from day one. So, from the 5-year-old who comes in my studio, I'm talking about, okay, well, we have to treat this tank. That's just between you and I don't call it that in front of them. We need to treat this box with strings on it really precious, because it's very expensive, and it's really precious, and we don't drop this, and if you don't take care of it, they're never going to loan you a Stradivari someday.
Right.
Because that's a thing. People get loaned these precious instruments that I've been talking about this episode to great soloists, and wow. That's usually banks or organizations, societies own them, and they lend them out because they need to be played, unless they're in a museum, which is just tragedy. Sometimes. So
your students are learning about these really old, really expensive instruments from the get-go.
Yeah, I think it's super important, because we have this tradition and we need to honor that. I mean, we are playing this antique instrument that has such a pedigree. And I think it's important for them to know that. It's a precious object. It's a piece of art. There's so much more than a fiddle. So that goes on day one. And it's really it's me trying to get this rambunctious 5-year-old to behave and to treat this thing well, right? Because that's all part of studying music is discipline and being calm and learning what to do with our emotions and our feelings and all that stuff. So it goes with that. But then every step up, I don't mean step up because they're just renting. So they're giving it back and getting a larger one. With every one, we're talking about what we're gaining now. Oh, look, you can, this sounds better. This is more even. Oh, look, now I can hear your vibrato so much better. And then once I know that, okay, this student is going through high school, then I do start talking to the parent about how much violins cost. And I do this many, many years in advance because, I do this as soon as I know, because they need as much warning as possible. It's not fair for me to one day just spring $6,000 to $10,000 purchase on a parent who's just been, calmly bopping along at a, I don't know how much rentals are. I don't know, $30, $40 a month, something like that. They've just been renting, having a hoot of a time. And then all of a sudden, like, oh, by the way, you should have been saving for this the whole time. That's not fair. And that doesn't even include the bow, I know they can get instruments for smaller than that, and we do. But if the student is serious, they do deserve something that is reflective of the hard work that they've put in. And unfortunately, this is the price point that we're at. And I find that $5,000 is just a wonderful place for my high schoolers to be at. And I've found violins that are cheaper than that. I've found violins that are more expensive than that. And it just depends on the person, and that's all fine, well, and good. But I do tell them, hey, you know, when your kid stops growing, or I mean, before that, you know, once they reach full size, that if they're serious, that this is the type of investment that you might want to be prepared for. But what I find that when I talk to parents about what's needed, if their child gets to XYZ, that when we get there, they're ready. And I say, okay, well, and I always give them like a year or 6 months of warning before I think it's time. And sometimes I even let them rent. I mean, I do certainly let them rent in the full size for a while. You know, it depends.
Okay.
Sometimes students get to full size that they're still young. They're like in middle school.
Yeah.
And I go, well, I mean, I don't think it's wise for you to buy your instrument yet because, you know, you're going to go and trouble's going to happen. But if it's a very careful middle schooler, then by all means, yeah. You know, so it's just about the kid. And we go and I warn them. I say, okay, you know, they're full size now. I think within the next year, they're going to advance so much that they're going to advance out of this instrument. And that I think the most important point is that the hard work is not going to come out. Like if they're working hard and Susie is working hard, their classmate, and they're equal violinists in every way, well, the one who has the better voice is the one that's going to get the part. There's going to get the position. And right. I know it's crappy, but that's what it is. That our voice is so tied to this box under our chin that if you don't have one that's reflective of what you want to sound like, then you're going to lose opportunities to the one that does. So once we get to that point, the parents are ready and they say, come to me, okay, we've got this price range. And whatever that is fine. And I really think that that's important for shops to understand, or, you know, is that every price point is fine. And you don't want to make anyone feel more or less because they've got more or less to spend.
So I'm curious, Rachelle, with price points, maybe this is a difficult thing to do, but if we take your average player at certain age groups, I guess you could say, let's say your student who's been playing for a couple of years, it's time to get a better instrument. They're in middle school. What would you find would be kind of an average price point for that middle schooler?
I don't think there's a one size fits all here. It's dependent on how much they want to spend and how serious they are. That's it. Because it's just not very serious, or they don't have a private teacher and they're not really working. They're just playing their school orchestra and there's no one to help them or guide them or anything. It really does depend on what their goals are and what they're doing. So I think that would be the first question I would have. Not, oh, this is a middle schooler and they've been playing for so many years, so A plus B equals this price range. Not at all. You have to ask so many more questions. You have to ask, okay, well, do you have a private teacher? First of all, that's the most important question you can ask anyone coming through your store for a couple of reasons. One, you're going to learn about the private teachers in your area, and then you can reach out to them. And two, you're going to find out, you know, that teacher is going to sell your violin for you. That's all. That I don't let my students roam out into the world and buy their own instruments. Absolutely not.
So you're very involved.
Extremely involved, to the point where it depends on how much time I have in particular time periods, but I have gone to shops on my own and said, I have a student, they're going to spend $4,000. Can you show me all the violins you have under $4,000? And I will sit in a room and I will play them down and I will pick 2 from that pile. Sometimes 3 if they're lucky. It's hard to find 3 that I like, though. I'm very picky. And I'll take 2 that I would approve of, that I would, I know it sounds horrible, but it's true. 2 that I would say, okay, these 2 have the qualities, or 3, let's be generous today. 3, these have the qualities that I would allow my students to play with. And I mean, I know I said allow, that's a very strong word. I don't allow anyone to do anything. Of course, everyone does what they want. But yeah, it's something that I would recommend, you know, that my students play on with all the care and love that I have. for them. And I go and so I've basically done all the hard work for them because they're not really capable of hearing all of the subtleties yet. And that's fine. I'm going to teach them about that. And sometimes I even do that process with the student, but then it's a little bit more laborious and takes a lot more time because I have to explain things and then I have to let them play it. And it's much easier because if I've given like a collection of 20 violins or so, that takes, I mean, I'm pretty fast at it now, but that takes time, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So I usually just get a few and then I bring them back to our lessons and then I start the process with them, teaching them about what the sound sounds like under the ear, away from the ear, the dull versus brilliant, the focus versus all over the place, the sweet versus powerful. I mean, the list goes on and on, but we start that learning, you know, then. And so I'm doing that work. The shop is there and they're there for me and that's all well and good, but they're giving me I'm making the sale. And every single time I do this with my students, it's okay, you can buy one of these two if you want. And so they're making the final choice because it should be their choice. It's their violin, it's their money, but it's from a pile that I've approved of.
Okay.
And for so many reasons. For resale value, for craftsmanship, you know, I love my students so much. I don't want to let them take out something that's going to put hard-earned money. I mean, we're talking thousands of dollars. This is not chump change, and I want to care for that as well. So yeah, I'm doing it. I'm doing it all.
Do you find yourself, and do you find other string players do this for their students as well? Is this kind of a common thing in the string world?
In my experience, it's always been like this. My teachers have always helped me select my instruments. This is the level of care that I've been shown. And it is fairly common to the point where my colleagues and my friends, my musician friends, we talk about this. We talk about, I was at the shop getting instruments for my kids. Yeah, we do this. And I think that's why these types of shops, these violin shops particularly, because they know how they sell instruments. They know this, you know, they know this is what goes down. And so if they've got your number or your email, you know, they're very good about making sure you know what they have. You know, and they're very good at taking care of you because they know that you will make that sale for them.
Yeah. Without naming names of shops in the area, do you have multiple choices? I mean, are there a few shops around?
Yeah.
How do you select a shop, I guess, or maybe a couple shops, but what do you look for in a store for yourself and for your students?
Yeah. It's hard because I have a few shops that treat me very well. You know, like if some new thing comes in, they'll let me try it. They've loaned me instruments at times. I've gotten a complimentary pack of strings, you know, just little things here and there to show that they appreciate me sending them my students. And I have shops that don't do any of this, but they know my name, and every time I walk in, they make me feel good, and they ask the right questions, and they're courteous and all that stuff. And I'd like to say that I'm not biased to send my students to the ones that give me the kickback or whatever, and I'm being crude, of course, because it's not like that. It's very elegant. For a lot of business, I do. For the rental market, I definitely send my students, because if they've got nice instruments and it suits me well, then I don't mind, because I'm getting what I need. I'm getting good quality instruments that are coming in and out of my door each lesson, and that's good for us. So yeah, I'm sending my rental business definitely there. But when it comes time to make the big purchase, like the forever violin or the step-up violin or whatever, and normally I only walk my students through one, because after that they go to college and they leave me. So usually they don't need another violin before that time happens. So I usually do this once. Sometimes I do help a student buy a 3/4 instrument. I've done that a handful of times.
Okay.
So then I would do it twice, but with most it's happening once. For that big purchase though, I I like them to see everything, because it's not fair. It's okay because such and such a shop gave me, you know, a discount on my bow, which was nice. Doesn't mean that I'm going to deny my students of seeing something that could be really right for them. So when that happens, I'm shopping everywhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there are various aspects to a music store or violin shop. You have the luthier back in the repairs. You have accessories, which could be basic things like rosin and strings, and then you have the instrument selection and the bow selection and the cases. Of those things I just mentioned, is there anything that can really make or break whether you find that shop somewhere you'd want to send your students?
Yeah. Whether they have the stuff I use.
The stuff you use.
Yes, the stuff I use, or the stuff like I like to use. It doesn't have to be exactly, but a lot of times I'll just give you a blanket example. A lot of times I'll walk into a music store, and this is not a violin shop because violin shops don't do this, but a music store where they've got also other instruments for sale, like other families of instruments. And there'll be the string section there. And there's like just a spattering of strings. Most of them are steel, and a spattering of rosin. Mostly it's this mass produced, like common rosin, some dampits, and that's it. So like, that's not for me. This is not for me, and it's not for my students, because I can't use anything there. Honestly, I don't care where I buy my strings from. If you've got my strings, you've got my strings. So, I'm a huge fan of Tomastic, and I use dominance. I recommend that my students use dominance. So, and I'm not saying that you have to carry Tomastic, but if you're carrying other like Perlencourt, high quality strings that professionals use, students use those too. I recommend my students use dominance. That's a common thing. Dominants are such a popular string. They're so common. And just to deny that whole market, because you think that students don't use dominance, students use dominance. They're on every violin, a lot of violins, and adults, professionals use dominance. Like, it's just a standard string. So if you don't have dominance in your shop, you are not in touch with string players. And I don't mean to say like, oh, dominant is like the epitome of string. No, I don't mean to say that at all. There's so many other varieties of string, so many other brands, so many other whatever. It's just that dominants are so popular, like extremely popular. So if you don't know that, and you don't have that, you don't have your finger on the pulse of string players. That's a problem. So,
okay. Yeah. Yeah. So I've gathered over our conversation that you tend to go to shops that are considered violin shops. They're specifically and only carrying the violin, viola, cello, bass family of instruments. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's correct.
In a lot of music stores that have school reps, like that we're talking to, ed reps, they work for stores that carry everything.
Yes.
And they might even carry pianos and guitars.
Yeah.
But I know a lot of them wanted to provide the best service they can to string teachers and to string students.
Yeah.
What advice would you give a music store that carries everything, that might be called a school music dealer? What advice would you give them to, I guess, up their game in the string world to attract more teachers like yourself?
Yeah, I have some advice. The first thing I want to say is that just because you service all musicians doesn't mean that you can't service string players really nicely. And like I said earlier about the strings, if you're carrying my strings and I happen to be in your shop, I'm going to buy my strings. I don't need to buy them from a luthier shop or from a violin shop. I don't care. If you have what I need, I'm going to buy it there. So that's the first thing. And how you get to that point is not by trusting what I'm saying about, I like dominant strings and you should carry dominant strings. Because I'm not in your community. And for that, you need to access the musicians that are in your community. And that is the single best piece of advice I can give you. That your private teachers, your professional orchestral musicians, if you have a local symphony, if you have a local, philharmonic, if you have a community orchestra, I don't know, find the musicians, find the string players, find the people who are doing it for a living, find the people who are doing it for fun. If they've got a violin in their hand and you want to service violin players, you need to find these people and you need to ask questions. What do you play? What do you like to play? What strings do you use? What rosin do you use? What do you use to support your setup? I use shoulder rest, chin rest, this kind of thing. What music do what can we order you? I don't know. That is you got to get to know your community and stock what they like. My local violin shops have even done this, where they asked me, and they're a violin shop, what strings do you use? What rosin do you use? What are you putting on the backs of your violin students? What can we stock for you? And it's so funny because I used to use this rosin, Kolstein, I don't know, it came in like a gold round cardboard box. And I loved it. And somebody just asked me in passing, I didn't really know why they were asking me, because I wasn't in tune to this world yet. And there's, what kind of rosin do you use? And I said, I'm using this, I think it's Kolstein, blah, blah, blah. And the next time I came into the shop, they had like stocked with it.
Wow. They listened.
I know, right? And I was like, oh, wow, you got my rosin. They're like, yeah, because you said that's what you use. Yeah.
It's amazing.
And I mean, they must have
Did that make
heard
a great impression on you?
Of course, yes. And I bought it, because mine was dead at the time. So, or, just gone. Anyways, it's helpful because you're making your introduction, but you're not pushing your store. You're not trying to prove anything to anyone, and you don't need to. You're a music store. You're servicing so many musicians. That's amazing. It's a good thing. And just because us violinists tend to be a little elitist and we've got our violin shops and our fancy Stradivarius and all of this business, doesn't mean that you can't be there for us too. It's just that you have to make the introduction a little different, and that is always asking questions and never being afraid to ask the question because you think it might make you appear unknowledgeable or unable or unequipped to handle the string player's needs. I think it makes you look more equipped. How can you be jack of all trades, literally in your music store, servicing all genres of instruments, and know every single thing about every single one of them? We know you don't. so you don't need to be. It's okay. For the professional coming through your door, and remember, for every professional you meet, they've got a private studio. We all do. I mean, it's hard to find a musician, a violinist that doesn't teach. And they're out there, I guess more in the major symphonies and stuff, but still they have students. People have students. It's part of the job. So for every professional you meet, they've got students. And if they know that you've got dominance and you've got that rosin, that's great. The last piece of advice I would say is that after you've made your introduction and you've asked your questions and you've listened, and you don't need to be more than you are. I think that's something that I'm learning in my own personal life, is that just come as you are. It's totally fine, and be completely open with what you know and what you don't know. And that's no one expects more from you. It's really great just to be whatever shop you are. That if you have a luthier on staff and they're doing good work, you need to get that word out. And by good work, I mean that they're able to rehair a bow well, and that they're able to, close a seam and set a bridge up nicely. Because those are really common, I put quote unquote repairs, because it's really just kind of maintenance sometimes. A nice sound post adjustment, I would say too. But if you've got somebody that does these 4 things really well, then get that word out. because we're always in the need of like a fast bow repair, or, oh my goodness, my bridge fell. I'm not sure if I got it in the right spot. Or, oh, the seam opened up and I need to play on Saturday. Like, can you just please like close it? And I don't have time, or the other store's closed, or I don't know, or my student needs something and you're closer. If you're doing this work, you need to let it know. Now, here's a flip side of this that I just have to be honest about. If you're not doing good work, that is such a deal breaker. And that kind of work, that kind of reputation travels fast. So if you don't feel that the person, if the person in the back is also making repairs on tubas, I doubt that they're going to glue my seam correctly. So, not that it can't happen, but I would be very wary of that. And so if they're not doing good work for whatever reason, then I think don't have them do that work. Because this travels like wildfire. Or just repair the rentals, or do, something. But if a professional comes in and asks for a bow repair, sorry, we don't do that.
Okay. So a great luthier can really be an attractant to the best players and teachers around, but a non-luthier doing string work, it would be a detractant. It almost sounds like.
And there's been a couple places where I've walked in. Gosh, it happens so much more than I thought it did, where there's the repair person and they are repairing everything. And that just scares me so much. And then you see the work that comes out and you go, oh no. So that is a area where, if you are a shop owner and you think that the person in the back is capable of fixing everything, and I don't want to shoot myself in the foot. Like, really, I'm sure it's possible, and I'm sure there's some lovely, competent repair people out there that I just have not met, and I acknowledge that is a possibility. But I think that you also have to acknowledge that people go to school for years to be able to do this, and they apprentice for years to be able to, with a luthier to do this. And if you think that someone's just going to pick up these techniques and by shadowing, some brass repair work, I would think again.
So it sounds like hiring a well-trained luthier with a good reputation in the community is a worthy investment.
Oh,
if you want
so
to take,
good. Yes.
If you want to build your string business in your market.
Yes. And I think a lot of times what these luthiers do is that they roam around sometimes. They have, okay, on Monday I'm out in this little shop, and then on Tuesday I visit this and I pick up all their bows and I rehair them. And then on Wednesday I'm at my own shop, and on Thursday I'm here. Or Mondays, Wednesdays I'm at this shop and the other. So they roam because the business is kind of spread out like that. And so if you can get your hands on one that's willing to come in on Wednesday and do all your bow repairs, not only are you going to make that person super happy, but they're going to do outstanding work. And then your shop is going to get that reputation, even though it's somebody, it's a freelanced position.
Yeah.
And now you may not be able to give somebody a rush job on their bow repair, but you never know. You could give that person a call. Hey, can you do this in an hour? Blah, blah, blah. You develop a relationship. The idea is that the string world has such a long legacy from these ancient instruments that I'm talking about, and everything it took for Stradivari and Guarneri to get to that place, and all the makers that came before them, and everything that's happened since, and this long tradition. And we all talk to each other about things, and we all rely on tradition to teach us how these instruments are played and how we perform, and like everything relies on this kind of word of mouth, and you need to get plugged into that. So having a luthier around that's got a great reputation, that's going to spread, because we're going to know that, oh, I can't get to that guy's shop because it's too far away from my house. But I didn't know they were doing work out of such and such music store. I'll just go there. And while I'm in there, by the way, I see that they have dominants. So I'm going to buy my strings. You see, it just spreads and it tumbles. And then they see that, oh, you're stocking the Suzuki repertoire. Oh my goodness, my student needs book 2. I'm going to tell them to come in here. And then now all of a sudden, they know my name because they've asked who I am. And then I've shared with them that I'm such and such and I have a studio of 20 plus and blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And now they're asking me, well, what kind of instruments do you like for your students? And somebody is knocking on my studio door with a handful of instruments for me to try and get my opinion on. And now I've tried your instruments. I've played them and I know what I think about them. And then, your rep takes them back, and a couple of years from now, I have a student who's, I know I said years because these seeds take time, but such and such student has to make a step up. Oh, by the way, I played a very nice instrument out of this shop. So why don't you try there instead of the music? Let's take some violins from the violin shop and let's take some violins from such and such music store. Because I tried a really nice, affordable instrument from there a long time ago. This is how it happened.
That is such great insight and advice. And I can't thank you enough for your time and in your openness to share everything about strings and how music stores can be better for teachers like you and for your students and raise the bar of their own service and string department.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you. And I wish you so much luck with this podcast. It's a great idea. And I can't wait to listen.
Thanks, Rachelle. We hope you found the information in this episode useful and something you can use in your everyday life as an ed rep. If there is a topic you'd like to learn more about and have presented on a future episode of Ed Rep Radio, or you'd like to give us some feedback in general, please email us at edrepradio@eastmanstrings.com. To learn more about Eastman Music Company, go to our website, eastmanmusiccompany.com, or give your Eastman rep a call. Thanks, and drive safe.